Hello again. Welcome back to me revisiting all of the Harry Potter books while I reread the series on my Christmas break. This is going to be so much fun. I already did the first video. You can go ahead and check that one out for Sorcerer's Stone. And of course, next we have Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Now, before we start, obviously this video is going to contain spoilers for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and probably a little bit for the rest of the series too. So getting right into it, again, I mentioned that I've read Sorcerer's Stone multiple times, and now the rest of the books I've only read once. So reading this one, it was really nice getting into a Harry Potter book where he knows from the start that he's a wizard and he knows where he belongs. It's nice to see that Harry actually kind of has a leg up on the Dursleys this time because they're really afraid of him because he's a wizard and they don't want him bringing any of that Hogwarts stuff back to their house. And so they're not pushing him around as much as they were earlier. They're almost kind of keeping an arm's distance at him. And it's really great to see that he has that little bit of victory over him. I think that and a few other things kind of lends to this book being a little more enjoyable right from the very get-go than the Sorcerer's Stone was. Because Harry does already know about Hogwarts, but also this book doesn't spend as much time with the Dursleys at the very start as Sorcerer's Stone does, because that was more set up. But from this one, he's only with them for a couple chapters, and then we're back to Hogwarts. But also, the plot is introduced much sooner in this book than it was in Sorcerer's Stone. I mentioned in my last review that the Sorcerer's Stone is not mentioned until very late into that book. But with this one, right off the bat, when Dobby comes to visit in the second chapter, we see that he's warning Harry Potter not to come because there's a danger at Hogwarts, so that instantly kind of gets your mind turning, sets up this mystery that's to come throughout the rest of the book. Speaking of Dobby, he's in this book just the right amount. If he was in it any more, he'd be super annoying. There's the perfect Dobby to rest of the book ratio in this one. And then once Ron comes and rescues Harry, and then later on they go back to Diagon Alley, it's just great seeing all the friends back together again, getting back into the world, learning a little bit more about it as we go, but just seeing them reunite and then seeing them go back into school and actually feel like they already have a place there, it's just so great. We get to see them growing as wizards as they take more classes and they learn how to duel and things like that. Very enjoyable to see. Speaking of which, they have a class with mandrakes, and Professor Sprout says that mandrakes fully grown are allowed enough to kill a person. When I was reading it this time, I feel like that is super overpowered and super underused. I feel like that could be super useful in the Battle of Hogwarts in the last book. Just have a bunch of fully grown mandrakes, everyone at Hogwarts has earmuffs in, rip those things out, everyone is dead, instantly. That seems like the easiest, most go-to weapon of all time, but I'll let it slide. Now, I will say for me, and I think most commonly this is everyone's least favorite Harry Potter book, not that it's not great, not that it's not absolutely fantastic, it is, but I think a lot of what lends to that is the fact that structurally, it's very similar to Sorcerer's Stone. Even lengthwise, it's only like 30 pages more than Sorcerer's Stone. They're both very much aimed at children. They're both setup books for a much bigger universe and much bigger series, so they do feel very similar at times. But with that being said, like I mentioned, it is still a setup book, and so we get to see a lot of seeds planted that are then going to grow later in the series to much bigger things. Starting with little things like Ginny having a crush on Harry, which we know how it ends later in the series. But when it comes to things that become very big deals down the line, we have things like Harry being a Parselmouth, and the diary, which obviously ends up being a Horcrux, and Lucius Malfoy maybe still kind of having some allegiance to Voldemort. Things like that make these first two books so good and so enjoyable on a reread, because after knowing everything that happens in the series, you can see these little things that were set up and know how they pay off. But when you're reading them the first time, they completely go into your radar as just, oh, this little thing pops up in this book, probably isn't going to have any big consequences. It does! And again, with this being very similar to Sorcerer's Stone, it's a great mystery. This works so well as just a mystery book, even if it wasn't an awesome Harry Potter book. It's constantly intriguing. I love finding out new information about it, even though I already know what happens. Seeing all the pieces come together is super, super fun. All that being said, though, this book does have issues. I think they stick out a little bit more to me on a reread, especially towards the end of the book. There were really only two things that stuck out to me as issues, really. I think it kind of being structurally similar to Sorcerer's Stone, I'll let pass. It's not that big of a deal. It's not like the plot is exactly the same. I think that's kind of needed for these two, again, children's books, but also setup books for something that becomes much bigger. But in terms of two things that I think are actually flaws and stuck out to me when I was rereading, the convenience of the plot, it's very convenient how every single person who gets petrified just so happened to see the basilisk in a way that prevented them from dying. The odds of all of those things happening so perfectly as to not kill the characters is obviously pretty far-fetched. But again, we're dealing with wizards and stuff, but that particular element isn't as airtight as some things that go on later in the series that are just everything lines up perfectly. The whole petrification thing in this book, pretty convenient how things happened. And then the second thing I noticed is that there is a lot of exposition in the end of this book when Tom Riddle and Harry are actually in the Chamber of Secrets. Tom's dialogue in that scene isn't always the best. Sometimes it feels like Tom is saying the exact right thing so that Harry and the reader will be able to know why certain things happen throughout the rest of the book, which obviously the dialogue is tailor-made for that, but there are times that Tom says things that nobody would ever say. It doesn't sound like something that an actual person would say, but it's just said to move the plot along and so that you understand certain things, because the book's wrapping up and you need to understand why certain things happen the way they did, and it's not always the most natural thing in the world. So that was a little distracting to me when I was reading the end of the book. It was just like, why is he saying all these things? Nobody would say that. He's saying it just so we understand what happened. Also, Tom Marvolo Riddle then rearranged and spelling out I am Lord Voldemort ever since I read the book the first time has confused me. Like, did he rearrange those letters specifically to say I am Lord Voldemort? Like, I feel like that's so elaborate. Like, why not just come up with a different name? Or like, I don't know. It's just really weird how that works. I get that he used it with school friends before he even turned evil, but like, I don't know, that's just always seemed weird to me. I don't know if I'm the only one. Let me know if I'm the only one who's felt that way, because that just always has been weird to me. But in the end, obviously, everything ends up alright. Harry makes it out of the Chamber of Secrets, all that stuff, meets back up with Dumbledore, who comes back to the school, which I've always loved throughout the series, how Dumbledore kind of has this aura about him, and it's almost like his level of magic is above the rules of the wizarding world, but not in a way that's like, oh, that doesn't fit in the world because he's super overpowered. It's like he doesn't use his powers in like an attacking way ever. It's always very subtle. Like in the scene in the Sorcerer's Stone with the Mirror of Erised, he's sitting in the room when Harry comes in, and you kind of get the sense that he's seen Harry do that every single time, and then he tells Harry that he has methods of being invisible that don't require an invisibility cloak. And then in this book, there's that scene in Hagrid's hut where Ron and Harry are under the invisibility cloak, and Harry says he could have sworn that Dumbledore looked at him when he said that thing about people always being loyal to Dumbledore. And yeah, it's great, but I love the idea that Dumbledore's not really bending the laws of magic, but like, it's almost like he's outside the rules. Like, he's almost like omnipresent. It's really great. I love that. It just makes him feel like this super magical being. I love it. I've always loved how that pops up later on in the books, and you just kind of get the sense that he's everywhere. He knows everything that's happening, but he's not necessarily going to act on it because he knows that things are going to play out the way they should. You kind of see that later in Prisoner of Azkaban too. Speaking of which, that is going to be the next book that I'm revisiting, and I feel like the rest of the videos that I do on the series may be more like reviews, because again, I've already reviewed Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets back in the day when I first read the series, but I stopped at Chamber of Secrets. I never reviewed the rest of the series. I actually still have my notes from when I was first reading Prisoner of Azkaban. I was making notes about what I was going to say in my review. So the next videos in the series may be more like that. But until then, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys the next time that I see you.